So I graduated in 1965 with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and my major professor at the time was Dr. Raymond Kemper, and he was the chief psychologist for the Kentucky State Parole Board, and I was one of his favorite students, so he invited me to go to work at the state reformatory at LaGrange, where I was in charge of giving tests to all the inmates coming into the prison in Kentucky State Reformatory, 1,800 men. And when I took that position, my wife and I had, just gotten married. And one of the opportunities was given to me by the then dean of men was to come on campus and live on campus as a resident manager in Threcold Hall. So my wife and I were dorm managers. That was quite an experience because I was the only man on the co-ed side of the dormitory. My wife and I lived in the dormitory, which is now, I think, the honors division. But there was a beautiful apartment there on the first floor, which we got free of charge as a result of being dorm parents. So that worked out real well for us. And while I was going to school, and during the evening, working on my master's degree in counseling and guidance and serving as a resident director, I finished my degree, Master of Arts in Counseling and Guidance at UofL. Actually, the end was right at 66. And Dean Adams asked if I would like to come on the staff of the Dean of Students Office as Director of Fraternity Affairs. And so at that time, fraternity houses were in a lot of disrepair, and I was a member of Delta Upsilon fraternity when I was on the campus, and I was put in charge of the Interfraternity Council, and we began to think about building fraternity houses, which became the Fraternity Row over there now, where the Delta Upsilon chapter has a suite in the basement, one of those buildings, and it was a U-shaped facility with fraternities all around the U. And that was one of my sort of legacies, was the opportunity to have that come to fruition. And I remember actually going in there and helping them paint some of the woodwork and all the trim around to get it ready for school. And that was a significant opportunity. And at the same time, I was thinking about going back to school for my doctorate degree. And at that time, the Dean Adams was the Dean of Men, and he hired Director of Housing. It was Harold Adams. And Harold Adams lived in Stevenson Hall, and my wife and I lived in Threcold Hall, so we got to be close friends. And Harold actually he and his wife are the godparents for our little girl who was born on campus right after that. So we go back a long ways to good friends of Harold Adams. I was noticing one of their awards for fraternity, outstanding fraternity leadership, was given his name. Of course, a lot of the student walk here and all. So that brings back a lot of good memories, relationship with Harold. And of course, Blake Tanner was the director of the financial aids back then. So it was Director of Fraternity Affairs, I was Director of Fraternity Affairs, and Harold was Director of Housing, Blake was Director of Finance, and Dean Lawrence was the Dean of Students at the time, and Don Adams was Dean of Men. And my role became expanded into student activities at that time. I had a student activities committee, and we sponsored on-campus events like for homecoming. I never will forget Ronnie Millsap. We brought Ronnie Millsap, and I had to go pick up Tony Joe White was the front actor or performer before Ronnie Millsap. We were playing at Parkway Field, and I was outdoors, and he was a blind piano player, organ player, and really quite popular. And I'd go to student activity, those big nationwide events to bring in entertainers, and you'd book them at those events. and I picked up Tony Joe White at the airport and brought him in, and then I went and got Ronnie Millsap. And never will forget, the next morning after we'd had the outdoor activity for homecoming on the football field. At the time was Parkway Fields, where the football field practice area. Lee Carso called me up and said, "You got to get over here and bring your students over to pick up all these beer bottles and cans and things that were left on the field. If I can't have practice, if I don't get," so I got all my student activities committee together, and we went over and cleaned up his football field. But that was the good old days when Lee Carso was a football coach and played in Parkway Field and the Cardinal Stadium out at the fairgrounds. And you could. I remember one of the students dropped a pint of whiskey, and you could hear it all around because there's so few people in the stands. So it's gone a long way from playing football in the Cardinal Field out there at the fairgrounds to where it is now at the Papa John's Stadium. So it brings back a lot of memories. But also another one of the as student activities role then. I don't know if it was ever really given the title of Director of Student Activities, but I was in charge of student activities and fraternity affairs. And student activities then basically were bringing in events for the football homecoming, basketball homecoming. We brought in Bill Cosby. I remember giving Bill Cosby a check for $10,000 before he went on stage at Freedom Hall. And that was fun because I said, "Is there anything I can get you?" And I gave him a check for $10,000, and he asked me if he could have a Coke and popcorn before he went out there. So that was good. And I was kind of getting worried because his plane didn't come in, got there a little late, so I was worried about getting up in Freedom Hall and having to tell everybody that it's delayed. But he made it, got there on time. I guess the highlight of my Student Activities Council was playing the Fifth Dimension. We brought in the Fifth Dimension. That was Marilyn McCoo and Bill Davis. I don't know if you remember some Up, Up and Away in My Beautiful Balloon. Bill, I love you so, I always will. Well, gave them a check for $20,000 for playing in Freedom Hall. And I asked Marilyn McCoo if they would like to come on campus. And at that time, we had moved from Threckle to Miller Hall. So we've lived in Threckle and Miller Hall as resident. Those were the days when it was co-ed and the boys were on one side and the girls were on the other, and ever the twain shall meet. So that's changed a lot too. But so they said, "Sure, we'll come." So Marilyn McCoo and Bill Davis and the whole Fifth, they brought their sound equipment, set it up in our apartment on campus and Miller Hall, and all of the students got to meet and greet with the Fifth Dimension. So that was a highlight of those years. And then of course every year I'd go to different those student activity sort of meet the performers, and this one was in West Virginia. I guess that was in like '68, and I met a young man there named George Howe, who was working at the University of West Virginia, and I asked him, I was going to go back to school to work on my doctorate degree at IU in Bloomington, if he'd like to come up and interview for my position at the University of Louisville. And I knew it was a great time to bring him up here was during the Kentucky Derby. So he and his wife at the time was Judy. They came up. He's got a daughter by Judy, Heidi Howe now. But George and Judy at the time came up, and I was recruiting him to be student activities director, and that I guess that's when they started splitting up student activities from fraternities, because after that he didn't have anything to do with fraternities, he was just student activities. But George particularly loved old things. He had an old Model A, and I said, "You might really like this old building that we have on campus." And I took him over. That time it was Caldwell Tank Company, and this was a picture of the old building, barn raising. Come back of UofL's red barn. So that was one of the old time pictures. And he said he really, and I remember walking in there and showing him. There was pigeons flying around in it, and I said, "Man, you could really do something with this building if you liked student activities. Maybe get something going in here." So that was kind of the beginning of the Red Barn, and from that kind of entry into student activities, in fact, there was a building, a sort of an office space on the end of that, the old Caldwell Tank Company, that he and I walked up in there. Said, "Man, you could even have an office in here and all," but they tore that office part of it down. but they'd still had the old building there, and one of the things that this was off campus, it was across the street from the university, so we could still have alcoholic beverages in that building. So I made a pitch to Dean Lawrence, Dean of Students, if we could have a party there, and we had Your Father's Mustache. I booked Your Father's Mustache from New York to come in, and we had red, white tablecloths, and they were Dixieland band, played banjos and all that. And never will forget, because Dean Lawrence was set up, he was in charge of the bartending, but several events occurred that were coincidental. Harold Adams knew some people at the Alcoholic Beverage Control in Frankfurt, so he made a special trip to Frankfurt to get a one-night license to serve alcoholic beverages. I went to church at Lyndhurst, United Church of Christ out in the South End, and the chief of the fire department was a friend of mine. He was on our church council with me, and so I asked him for a one-night fire code permission to use the building for a party for one night. So we had a one-night alcoholic beverage and one-night fire permit, and we put on this big party, and that really was the spark that got the students excited. Louis Barnweiser and a couple other young students who were very entrepreneurial, and they were able to, this whole article's about them sort of petitioning the president, and but it was really a neat time. And of course we celebrated 44-year anniversary of the Red Barn just a couple weeks ago, and George has got all the pictures of all the activities up in the Red Barn. Now it's called the George J. Howe Red Barn. So that all came together, and I say that George was my best hire ever. I completed my doctorate from Indiana University, and came back and started working in Southern Indiana at the Mental Health and Guidance Center. My wife's a high school teacher. She taught at Jeff High, and that began my career in consulting and actual community activity. I just won an award here this February 1st as an extra miler award for volunteerism kind of work, and I've taught at the University of Louisville. Taught the last 3 years here for the Air Force cadets and doing emotional intelligence work and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm a 7 Habits facilitator, and then I've also taught for 34 years at Webster University in their human resource development area. So still been involved in academia all those years, and still love UofL. My wife and I are on the Arts and Science Alumni Council here, and still active in our fraternity. She's a Chi Omega, and of course I'm a Delta Upsilon member, and just won their Community Service Award last year actually now, and so still very much involved at the UofL.